The long windows of the tower at Old Hollow Junction looked over a web of iron that never truly slept. Freight rumbled through at noon, commuter cars at dusk, and the night brought the great interregionals, silver spines gliding through the dark. Martin Allard had tended the switches for 22 years, alone in the brick tower whose paint had peeled and repelled at least 3 generations of graffiti artists. He was a quiet man who preferred the ticking of signal relays to conversation. The railroad appreciated employees like that, men capable of long focus, men who did not ask to be transferred closer to town, men who did not pry into the company's long, secret history. Most nights passed identically. A red indicator lamp would wink on, Martin would consult the timetable, ease a lever forward, and the rails below would slide with the basso clang of locking plates. He would log the maneuver, sip gritty coffee, and wait for the next approach. It was the sameness that soothed him. Sameness pasted wallpaper over the rooms in his head where memory lived. Rooms he kept padlocked, though every now and then something banged on those doors from the inside. The first hint that reality itself might be hinged to his tower arrived on a Tuesday in November. The air smelled of wood smoke from distant stoves, and ice feathered the windows until Martin breathed on the glass and drew a small circle clear. Through that circle he tracked the 2217 northbound as its headlamp tunneled through falling snow. Someone had scrawled a note in the margin of the printed timetable. Switch 3 only if absolutely necessary. Dangerous resonance. Martin frowned. He had never seen the handwriting before, and nobody else had keys to the tower. At 03:33, he noticed the digital clock solely because the digits all repeated. Panel light number 3 flickered amber. A southbound freight was requesting the main line. The northbound he'd passed earlier was long gone. No conflict existed. Yet an instinct he couldn't name made him hover a finger over the brass-topped lever. Dangerous resonance. He laughed once, a dry sound in the room. Then he threw the switch just to prove whoever wrote the warning wrong. A tremor passed through the tower, as though the building had inhaled. The green lamps across the board glowed brighter. The tick-tick of the relays crescendoed into a brief metallic chitter. Then all seemed normal again. The train rolled past, its horn howling like a wolf denied the moon. Only after the last car had vanished did Martin notice movement on the outer platform, a place no train ever stopped. A boy of about 16 stepped from the shadows, shook snow from a denim jacket, and stared up at the tower's window. Martin's gut iced over, for he recognized the face, even beneath the buzz cut, even after 3 decades. Jory Sennett, the first boy Martin ever punched. In 7th grade, Jory had pinned him against lockers, chanting "Crybaby Allard," until Martin had swung wildly, connecting with jawbone. Blood, principal's office. Weeks of dread. Then one afternoon, Jory simply disappeared. His family moved without forwarding address. Seeing him now, alive and inexplicably present, ripped the wallpaper from memory's rooms. Martin scrambled down the iron stair, boots clanging. "Jory?" he called, though the voice sounded stolen from someone braver. The teenager cocked his head. "Got your message," Jory said, holding up a ticket stub stamped with tonight's date. "Figured we ought to finish what you started." Wind hissed along the rails. There was no train to board, no station agent to call. Martin backed up a step. "I didn't send any message." "You made the track change," Jory said, as though that explained everything, and took a boxer's stance. Knuckles cracked. His grin held no joking cruelty this time. It was thin, surgical. Martin retreated to the stair, heart drumming, and Jory followed. Halfway up, the tower lamps flared and died. When they blinked on again, the boy was gone. Only damp boot prints remained, leading to an edge that dropped 20 feet onto gravel. Later, long after dawn, Martin filed an incident report he never sent. He wrote that a trespasser had been seen. He omitted the name and the impossible resemblance. He told himself it had been fatigue, that the eyes could hallucinate shapes in storm-blurred snow. And yet he could not bring himself to touch switch 3 again, for 4 nights. Nothing unusual occurred. Then a ballast crew radioed, requesting the siding for equipment clearance at, his eyes salt-burned as he read the clock, 03:32. The lever sat mute, summoning a wholly irrational terror. This time he tried denying the request by radio, but static swallowed his voice and returned shrieking feedback. He flinched, and his elbow knocked the lever. It slid halfway before metal locked, and the rail points below shunted with audible clang. Aero 333 blinked on the display. The tower inhaled again. When the world settled, the sidetrack lights glowed aquamarine, a color Martin had never seen on railroad indicators. Outside, a single passenger car, antique varnished wood, sat on the siding, as if it had coasted there from some vanished century. Its windows were dark, but door handles gleamed. A woman descended the steps in heels, ill-suited for ballast. Her coat was the same aubergine wool Martin's ex-wife, Evelyn, had worn the winter she requested the divorce. She walked with the precise rhythm he remembered. One beat hesitation, then stride forward, the gait of someone forever analyzing exit strategies. Martin felt the echo of 1,000 arguments lodged behind his tongue. Empty boxes, unpaid bills, nights she waited while he pulled overtime. But what stunned him wasn't memory. It was her face. The years had not altered a freckle, and she carried the scent of violet soap he hadn't smelled since the day she left their apartment key on the counter. "Evelyn," he whispered when she stood at the foot of the stair. "You know why I'm here," she said. No frost escaped her mouth, as though she exhaled some other atmosphere. "Every switch you throw peels back a layer. The railroad called, so to speak. We're the cargo you buried. I don't understand." "Yes, you do." She touched the cold iron of the stair rail. "You steered me onto a siding once, remember? Left me waiting while you clocked hours. Haven't changed a bit. Still choosing tracks, still deaf to consequence." "I can change," he said, desperation cracking his own voice. "You already did," she sighed. "And every change births an echo. We're only the first echoes. Others are cued." She turned away and vanished into the antique car. The door latched. When Martin ran outside moments later, the siding was empty, rails unused, snow undisturbed. Panic drove him back to the console. He yanked each lever, verifying points, then powered down the panel entirely, killing both rails and radio. Nothing else moved that night, but sleep refused him. Every creak of the tower suggesting a passenger car materializing on ghost tracks. On his next 2 off days, he haunted the regional library, digging through company archives, hunting for mention of resonance, or Aero 333. What he found were yellowed memos from 1911 about chronal tides observed at Old Hollow when manual operators corrected routing errors at precise astronomical alignments. One superintendent wrote of duplicate consists disgorging unlisted riders, creatures wrapped in familiar flesh. The file ended abruptly, pages torn out. Martin took a train to the city headquarters, demanded to see a historian. The clerk laughed. The railroad didn't keep historians. "That's our problem," Martin answered and left empty-handed. He returned to his tower that evening with a bottle of rye and a plan as fragile as frost. If each change birthed an echo, he'd reverse the last alteration, sealing whatever crack he'd opened. At 03:33, he would restore the rails to their original alignment and lock every lever under padlock. 02:59. He sipped rye without water. 03:14. He paced, rehearsing motions. 03:32. He lifted the brass knob. Something rattled on the stair below, the hollow thud of wood on iron, the noise of a cane. His blood iced. The door swung inward and a figure entered, back straight despite age, eyes fierce as searchlights. His father, Elijah Allard, dead 9 years of liver rot. The elder Allard's breath whistled through teeth ground to nubs. The cane was hickory, carved with notches marking the belts and boards he'd broken on young Martin's spine. "I wondered when my turn would come," Elijah said, voice thick as tar. Always did like trains. Convenient of you to fetch me. Martin retreated till control panel levers dug his kidneys. You're not real. Real as that bottle. Elijah flicked the cane. Rye sloshed onto the floor. Martin had not seen the old man since hospice, when Elijah begged for forgiveness he'd never offered before. Martin had remained silent then. Now the apology was gone, burned off like morning dew. What remained was a storm of grievances. Every line you switched kept me locked away, Elijah said. But you can't quarantine memory forever. He advanced. Martin seized the nearest lever, switch 3, and jammed it forward. 0333. The tower inhaled larger than ever, sucking paperwork off desks. Lights exploded in green, aqua, ultraviolet. The floor trembled, throwing Elijah off balance. When perspective cleared, Elijah and the cane were gone. But the tower's window no longer showed winter. A blazing copper sun hung over fields of harvest wheat, and a saffron sky pulsed with birds unknown to Earth. Tracks converged into those fields from a dozen directions, fractal lines knitting vanishing point to horizon. On every rail rolled trains, old and new, steam funnels beside bullet noses, all sounding a harmonized chord instead of horns. The panel light streamed data symbols Martin had never learned. Orbits, tides, human silhouettes. One silhouette highlighted a single seat on a blinking carriage. The seat ID number matched a ticket stub still drying from rye on the floor. Jory Senate's. Understanding arrived not as thought, but as vertigo. Each switch displaced a timeline, exporting his suppressed guilt into orthogonal reality, and importing the guilt as flesh. The passengers were not simply echoes. They were shards of his own mind, given mass and vendetta. And somewhere inside that braided reality stood a central terminus where every track, every version of Martin Allard, could converge with disastrous symmetry. If he stopped switching, new shards might cease, but the existing ones roamed free, their revenge incomplete. If he continued switching, he would drown the world in infinite revenants. He saw the solution only because despair pried his mind wide. The lever must be thrown one last time, not to divert trains, but to shunt himself, operator as cargo, into the same siding where his passengers waited. Fuse cause and consequence. Heal the fracture by meeting it head-on. He rummaged for a length of copper wire, wound it around switch 3's shaft, and lashed the other end to the main power feed. When engaged, the circuit would fuse the switch in motion, preventing any future toggles. He checked the time, 0330 and whatever sun burned outside. Final run, he told the empty room and laughed because it sounded like a conductor's announcement. 0332 ticked. He inhaled. Beside the lever lay 3 tokens. Jory's ticket stub, a violet-scented button from Evelyn's coat, a notch broken from Elijah's cane, mementos he'd unconsciously pocketed in each encounter. He set them on the control board like payment. 0333. Martin Allard threw the switch. The tower did not inhale. It exhaled, blew out its windows in a cyclone of mirrored dust. For a heartbeat, the room stretched into a cathedral of rails, each shining downward into himself. He felt the presence of dozens, hundreds of Martins, their regrets chanting in semaphore flashes. Then the copper wire glowed white, and the circuit fused, locking switch 3 midway forever. He stood on a platform that smelled of violet and harvest grain and wood smoke simultaneously. Before him waited a train comprised of passenger cars mismatched by century. On its steps, Jory lounged, arms folded. Evelyn finger-combed her aubergine collar. Elijah thumped the cane's broken stump. Yet their eyes now held curiosity rather than malice, for they saw the man who had birthed them arrive without armor. "No more running," Martin said. Evelyn tilted her head. "Then ride with us." He boarded. The interior was larger than physics allowed, a museum corridor whose walls displayed scenes from his life. Some actual, some possibilities aborted by fear. He walked through them with his 3 companions. Where he flinched, they steadied him. Where they raged, he listened. When they reached the end, an empty compartment waited. 4 seats, a table, a chessboard half played. Jory moved a pawn. Elijah chuckled. Evelyn opened the window. Wheat scent mingled with engine steam. Far outside the compartment, somewhere down the track, Martin knew the frozen November night continued. The tower at Old Hollow now silent, lever fused. Trains would still need routing, and soon someone from dispatch would ascend those iron stairs, puzzle over the damage, and ultimately replace the panel with modern electronics ignorant of chronal resonance. But the tides would have receded, the crack sealed with the life that made it. "Where do we go?" Jory asked, boyish impatience returning. "Forward," Martin answered. "Always forward." The whistle blew, not a wolf's cry nor a harmonized chord, but a note that suggested forgiveness. Wheels bit steel, sparks nested in twilight, and the train gathered speed into landscapes stitched from every memory Martin Allard had hidden or lost. As rail and horizon blurred together, he felt the weight of switch levers lift from his shoulders, as though at last he'd given control to something vaster than guilt. An endless track that wrote itself just ahead of the engine, bright and new and mercifully unknown.